Hi, welcome back to my channel where I use R coding to create visualizations for my fantasy basketball team and try and use those visualizations to support my decision making. And so last week I looked at my forecast and I thought I was probably going to lose the week. And that's ended up coming true. I'm chasing on the last day. If I got incredibly lucky, I might win, but it's very, very unlikely. So, given I knew that was a possibility, I banked a couple of player trades. So, I've got two players I can trade still in this week's 7-day roster. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop a couple of players and add players that are likely to give me an advantage next week. And so, what I'm doing now is I'm having a look at the fantasy roster for next week. So, that's November 3rd to November 9th. And that's what's visualized on the x-axis here. On the y-axis are all the different teams. At the bottom is Atlanta, all the way up top to the Washington. And so to give myself a bit of extra support making decisions this week, I've colored the points by how many players I have on each of these teams. So gray, I don't have any players. Orange, I do have a player. And this darker orange, kind of brown color, I've got two players actually. So I have two New York Knicks players. And so, and the little points here show if that team is playing on this given day. Now, when I look at this next week's game roster, I always look at how many games total each team is playing. And so I can see here that, and that's the first number in this column, actually. So Charlotte is only playing 2 games next week. And that is not a lot. And so I have got a Charlotte player at the moment. There were really good pickups towards the end of this week because they were playing back-to-back games. But the consequence of that, often when you go into the following week, is they don't play as many games. So good pickups, you don't want to hold them if you don't have to going into the following week. So you can see here that I've got one Orange Charlotte player. I'm definitely going to want to drop that player in favor of somebody else going into the following week to give myself a better chance. And so if you're holding a Charlotte player who you're not particularly fond of or you would be willing to get rid of, then it probably is a good idea to drop them next week in favor of someone who's going to play 4 games. Now, so definitely do not want Charlotte. Charlotte is kind of out for next week. What else am I interested in? Well, if I am going to pick someone up and kind of stack my team in the early part of the week, I'm looking for back-to-backs. So that first one is Milwaukee Bucks. They're going to play 2 in a row. That could be a really good pickup for me instead of the Charlotte player. Similarly, I could also get the LA Clippers. They're going to play 3 games in 4 days. Now, you've got to balance things here. Just because they play back-to-back doesn't necessarily mean they're going to do better for you. You have to look at the averages of the player. But if I've got a player who's averaging, say, 30 points and they're playing 1 game, and you've got a player playing 30 points and they're going to play 2 games, and it's a no-brainer to make that switch. Okay. So you might be like, well, what are those extra numbers in the brackets there? Well, that's because I'm thinking of this week in 2 parts. So you can kind of see that the week is naturally split in the middle here. And so when I'm trying to optimize my player adds and drops, I'm going to be thinking about the teams in these 2 pieces because they almost completely disjoint problems. And so in the first half of this week, most players either play 1 or 2 games. And similarly, in the second half of this week, most players play 1 or 2 games. And so if I'm adding or dropping, that's kind of, I'm going to consider these 2 different windows separately. And so here you can see that Toronto only plays 1 game in this first half. San Antonio Spurs only play 1 game. Phoenix is kind of 1. They've got this game in the middle here. You could choose either way where you counted that. Orlando's only got 1. Who else? Cleveland only has 1. Chicago's only got 1. Charlotte only has 1. And Atlanta only has 1. And I actually have players playing on some of these teams, right? Like I've got a Phoenix player. I've got an Orlando player. I've got a Charlotte player. I said I'm definitely going to drop them. I've got an Atlanta player. So I could swap some of these and make sure I'm getting 2 games instead of that one. Going into the latter half of the week, Utah's only got 1 game. Portland's only got 1 game. Phoenix has only got 1 game. New York Knicks have only got 1 game. That's really going to hurt me because I have 2 players there. New Orleans Pelicans, LA Lakers, LA Clippers, Charlotte again. Yeah. And so going into the latter half of the week, I might be looking to drop those players and pick up someone else instead. And so that's kind of how I'm thinking about things this week. As always, when I'm thinking about adding and dropping players, I'm also looking for opportunities to get players playing back-to-back that might give me more options. And there's a lot of that this week. So there should be a lot of options where you can be picking up a player who's going to play 2 games for you instead of the 1. So for example, here, Philly, OKC, New Orleans Pelicans, already said about Milwaukee, Golden State Warriors, LA Clippers. I think those are the ones for early on in the week. I may have missed some, but that looks about right. And then going to the latter half of the week, there's lots of players who are playing back-to-back. So like Washington, Toronto, San Antonio Spurs, Philadelphia, Miami. That's Indiana again. And then there's a whole bunch here who are going to play back-to-back. So that's your Detroit down to Chicago, I think. Detroit, Denver, Dallas, Cleveland, and Chicago. Yeah. And then 1 more at the bottom here, Atlanta. So might be worth keeping an eye out for those players when you're thinking about who to pick up on which days this week. As always, good luck with your fantasy. Hopefully thinking about your team in these ways is useful, and looking at visualizations like this is really useful as well. I'll try and record a few more videos that show some more visualizations about how I think about my team and how I think about the statistics of my fantasy basketball. Thanks.